In football, there are a lot of what ifs. Things happen that can change the course of a team forever. These 7 dynasties will always be teams who never lived up to their potential for a variety of reasons. Things like player disputes, choking in the playoffs, or even a player dying. Let's get started. Number 1, the Purple People Eaters. Now, you might have heard of the Steel Curtain, nicknamed to the dominant defense of the Steelers in the 1970s, but this was the best nicknamed team prior to them. Listen to this lineup of their defensive line. Gary Larson and Jim Marshall were both multiple Pro Bowlers. Carl Eller was a 6-time Pro Bowler and Hall of Famer. And last, Alan Page was a 9-time Pro Bowler, the 1971 MVP, and Hall of Famer. These 4 were given the nickname of the Purple People Eaters. They had a season where every single one of them made the Pro Bowl, and their defense ranked number 1 in fewest points allowed, fewest yards allowed, and sacked the opposing quarterback 50 times. Meanwhile, their offense scored the most points in the league that season, led by Fran Tarkenton, the 1970s version of Russell Wilson, the pioneer of scrambling quarterbacks. But unfortunately, their old school head coach wasn't a fan of Mr. Improvise and traded him off to New York. The funniest part about this situation is later, he came to play against Minnesota. After trailing 23-10 in the fourth quarter, Tarkenton threw 2 touchdown passes to secure a 24-23 comeback victory over his former team. The 24 points allowed by Minnesota's defense was the season worst for the unit, and oddly enough, Minnesota ended up trading the house for him back later on. When they got him back, he was great, winning MVP in 1975. This football team went to 3 Super Bowls in 7 seasons, but didn't win a single one. How they didn't? I don't know. Number 2, the St. Louis Rams. After a disastrous 4-12 season in 1998, the Rams front office went balls to the wall. They made a trade for 3-time Pro Bowler and future Hall of Fame running back Marshall Faulk. They signed quarterback Trent Green. They drafted college phenom Torrey Holt with their first-round selection in the NFL draft. And last, they signed new offensive coordinator Mike Martz, who implemented a whole new offense. Meet the greatest show on turf, but it wouldn't be complete without what I'm about to say. Quarterback Trent Green went down in the preseason with a bad injury, which left the Rams no choice but to plug in unproven 27-year-old Kurt Warner. He ended up having one of the greatest single seasons of all time, 4,300 yards, 41 touchdowns, and the 3rd highest single season passer rating in NFL history, which led him to winning NFL MVP. And that's not the only impressive stat line. Running back Marshall Faulk had 1,300 rush yards and had 87 catches for over 1,000 yards. He was the NFL Offensive Player of the Year and was second in MVP voting to his own teammate. Not to mention, they had one of the most complete receiving corps in NFL history, with Isaac Bruce, Torrey Holt, and Oz Zahir Hakim. Then on defense, Kevin Carter led the team with 17 sacks. Now, we have the greatest show on turf. The 13-win Rams eventually went on to win in dramatic fashion against the Titans in the Super Bowl that season. But why they make the list is how they failed to ever win another one. With an incredibly young core of stars, this should have been a dynasty for a decade. Yet they only reached one more Super Bowl. And here's what happened after that incredible season. Their legendary coach Dick Vermeil retired, only to return to the Chiefs years later. Kurt Warner ended up breaking his hand and missing 5 games. But they actually were still amazing that season. Marshall Faulk had one of the greatest single seasons ever, with over 1,300 rush yards, 800 receiving yards, and 26 total touchdowns, which was a record at that time for non-quarterbacks. And he won the MVP that season. And even missing 5 games, Kurt Warner managed to play well enough to finish second in MVP voting. Him and Marshall Faulk literally flip-flopped from the previous season. And here's the crazy stat to me. Torrey Holt and Isaac Bruce both combined over 3,000 receiving yards and both having over 1,400 yards each. And Torrey Holt actually led the league in yards. How did this team have such crazy offensive numbers? After failing to reach the Super Bowl in 2000, the greatest show on turf returned to the best NFL offense again and another MVP for Kurt Warner. But they ended up running into the beginning of the next great NFL dynasty, matching up against the Patriots in the Super Bowl. Oddly enough, they outgained the Patriots by almost double the yards, and they seemed to let it slip away in the end. Even though there's some controversy to this game, afterwards, things were never the same. Kurt Warner fell off the map, eventually being replaced by Mark Bulger. And if you believe in the Madden curse, Marshall Faulk was on the cover of Madden 03, and he was never the same after that. This team might be the greatest one-year wonder team of all time. Number 3 is the Philadelphia Eagles. Led by future Hall of Fame quarterback Donovan McNabb, a plethora of great running backs, and a stout defense, the Eagles were a contender every season. And in 2004, in what seemed to be a recruitment by McNabb, they signed Terrell Owens, creating one of the most iconic duos in the mid-2000s. Maybe even the most entertaining team to play with on Madden back in the day, with the exception of Michael Vick and the Falcons. But this team was absolutely loaded with talent all around the board. With a surplus of Pro Bowlers on the defensive side, this is the most complete team on this list so far. Now, this team only made it to 1 Super Bowl, but they went to 4 straight NFC Championship games. With the addition of Owens, that 4th and final time was the year they made it to the Super Bowl, and just like the Rams, they ran into the Patriots. After losing by 3 points, things were never the same. You can credit a lot of this due to the feud between McNabb and Owens. Even though Owens put this team into serious Super Bowl contention, he seemed to be a detriment as well. T.O. would always be in McNabb's face complaining about not getting the ball enough, which started to cause their relationship to worsen. During the 2004 season, T.O. ended up getting injured, and what McNabb said about him following the injury set Owens off.
Have to replace T.O. Understand, we do not have to replace T.O.
Owens complained openly about McNabb and really started to only care about his self-image. During the preseason of the next season, he ended up getting suspended by the team due to his actions, and Owens was out of Philadelphia after only 2 seasons. Just think, if Owens could have possibly swallowed a bit of his pride and did what was best for the team and tried to keep a good relationship with McNabb, the dude who literally brought him to Philly, this team could have been something special. But for who he is, this team will always be a what if. Number 4, the Indianapolis Colts. I don't know how they messed this up. This team was great for so long. They had Peyton Manning in his prime, the greatest regular season quarterback of all time, with an arsenal of weapons surrounding him. The amount of Hall of Fame level talent on this team is almost unfair. Peyton Manning threw 114 touchdowns to Marvin Harrison alone, which is probably a record that will never be broken. But this team also had Reggie Wayne and Dallas Clark, 2 more prolific pass catchers. Then in the backfield, they had Edgerrin James from 1999 to 2005. This always seemed to be a legendary regular season team that would somehow lose every single year in the playoffs. They started 13-0 in 2005, only to lose in the divisional round. They started 14-0 in 2009, then lost to the Saints in the Super Bowl. They had multiple seasons with 12 wins or more, yet only came away with 1 Super Bowl in that span of dominance. A big problem was the front office. They refused to get talent to improve interior personnel and improve the defense. It is tough to be a dynasty with only being great on one side of the ball. From 2000 to 2009, the Colts had finished with the most regular season wins and the highest winning percentage of any team in the NFL during that span. Can you believe that only got them 1 ring? Number 5 is the New Age Vikings. 30 years removed from the Purple People Eaters, the Vikings make this list twice. Following a solid 1997 season, the Vikings drafted a player who would go down as one of the greatest, if not the greatest receiver of all time, Randy Moss. And behind his 17 touchdowns his rookie season, this team had scored the most points of all time in a single season. This team was loaded all around, with 4-time Pro Bowler and league MVP Randall Cunningham at quarterback, and also having Hall of Fame wide receiver Chris Carter. This wasn't a one side of the ball team either. Their defense was the 6th best in points allowed. This team was so good, they went 15-1 and blew out the Cardinals in their first playoff game. And going into the NFC Championship as 11-point favorites, they seemed all but destined for a Super Bowl berth. But late in the game, being up by 7 points with about 2 minutes left to play, they sent out Gary Anderson onto the field, the man who had missed a single field goal in 2 seasons. If he makes this field goal, they would be up by 2 scores and this game would be put away. Then, this happened. The Falcons would rally after that, scoring a touchdown and then later upsetting the Vikings in overtime. That kick might go down as the biggest choke by a kicker ever for the Minnesota Vikings. Oh wait. Coming from a Browns fan, I'm sorry Vikings fans. But another reason why this team is on the list is for the man they drafted that following season, Mr. Dante Culpepper. 2 seasons from that amazing run, Cunningham had fallen off planet Earth and Culpepper exploded onto the scene. Starting that season 7-0 and showing promise with his favorite target Randy Moss, they seemed to be a deadly duo for years to come. This team was led by 6 Pro Bowlers all around the field, and they would reach the conference championship once again, only to get blown out. And then heading into the next season, something horrific happened. One of their Pro Bowlers, offensive tackle Corey Stringer, actually died in training camp from complications from heat stroke. What a horrible event to take place.
After the game, seeing his wife and son in the lounge.
And the training staff was put into question, being sued by Stringer's family over the whole situation. This team was completely shook from this situation, and for good reason, and they were never the same, finishing 5-11 that season and not making the playoffs again for quite a few seasons. Number 6 is the Miami Dolphins. After being the 6th quarterback drafted in the first round of the 1983 NFL Draft, and quite possibly the greatest quarterback never to win a Super Bowl, Dan Marino probably makes the Mount Rushmore of quarterbacks. After only reaching one Super Bowl and getting blown out, this team left a lot of what-ifs on the table. Sadly, the closest this dynasty was to a Super Bowl victory was an Ace Ventura. Going back to Marino, after a promising rookie season, he was looking to take the league by storm, and he did. During the 1984 season, Marino set multiple records on his way to leading his team to a league-best 14-2 record. Then after 2 blowout victories that started their playoff run, they marched straight to the Super Bowl. And in the AFC Championship, Dan Marino threw for 400 yards and 4 touchdowns. They seemed destined for a Super Bowl victory. The stage was set, and they matched up against the San Francisco 49ers. And it's safe to say, it just wasn't their day, and they were blown out by over 20 points. And after only reaching the AFC Championship the next season, they missed the playoffs for following seasons afterwards. Dan Marino had an illustrious career, but the Dolphins front office failed to put any talent on the defensive side throughout his career in Miami. This team had their savior leading this team, yet they failed to make the playoffs just 2 seasons removed from their 14-win season. It's honestly a shame. And last, we have the Buffalo Bills. This one amazes me the most. If you haven't seen the 30 for 30 on this dynasty, go watch it. It's on Netflix. It is unbelievable. This team also had another Hall of Fame quarterback from that 1983 NFL Draft, Jim Kelly. Oddly enough, Jim Kelly refused to play for Buffalo at first, and he went on to play for a few seasons in the USFL. And after that league fell through, he ended up signing with Buffalo and helped revolutionize football forever. This team literally invented the no-huddle offense, with the versatile running back in Thurman Thomas, an excellent underneath slot receiver in Andre Reed, and a vertical threat in James Lofton. This team's philosophy was ahead of its time, and 1990 was the year this dynasty started. Topping the AFC with a 13-3 record, Buffalo cruised to an AFC championship where they matched up against the Raiders. The Raiders were completely dependent on their dominant defense, led by guys like Hall of Famer Howie Long. And the funny part, the Raiders seemed completely unprepared for the no-huddle offense, and were completely gassed the entire game.
They're getting winded. I'm not sure they're tiring, but that can really have a profound effect on this game because if they get all that time, they can't miss.
They ended up losing by a ridiculous margin of 48 points, which is one of the biggest blowouts in playoff history. And going into the Super Bowl, they were favored against the New York Giants. The only chance the Giants really had was to play keep away the entire game, which they executed perfectly, absolutely dominating time of possession. But even with how well the Giants executed their game plan, the Bills still had a chance to win. With the Giants up by 1, the Bills had one last chance. They drove down the field, and with 8 seconds left, set up for the game-winning field goal. And here is what happened. This was the closest the Bills ever got. But here is where things get crazy. After this game, the Bills would return to the Super Bowl not once, not twice, but 3 straight times. 4 Super Bowls in a row is insanity. That just doesn't happen. Sadly, Scott Norwood's miss seemed to be foreshadowing their future. How they would get so close, only to be heartbroken in the final game every single year. This is the only team ever to appear in 4 straight Super Bowls. The only team that was even close to that was the Miami Dolphins in the early 70s, who went to 3 straight Super Bowls. That miss might have gotten into the psyche of the Buffalo Bills, and something that they could never recover from. And sadly, they're probably the greatest team to never win a Super Bowl.